Have you ever had the strange feeling that something was about to happen, long before you could explain why? A conversation suddenly changed direction. You sensed tension before anyone spoke. You trusted someone immediately, or felt uneasy without knowing the reason. Most people call these moments intuition. But what if intuition is not magic? What if it is your brain recognizing patterns long before your conscious mind catches up? Tonight, we're going to explore the invisible signals that quietly shape the way you experience the world. Chapter 1. Your brain is always watching, approximately 2 minutes. At this very moment, your eyes are moving across the screen. Your ears may be picking up distant sounds. Your skin senses the temperature of the room. Your body constantly adjusts its balance. Most of this never reaches conscious awareness. Yet your brain notices it all. Human perception is selective, not because the brain is careless, but because reality contains far more information than conscious thought could ever process. Scientists estimate that our senses receive an enormous amount of information every second. Only a tiny fraction becomes part of conscious awareness. The rest is filtered, compared with past experiences, and used to build predictions about what is happening around us. This process is so efficient that we rarely notice it. But occasionally, something unusual happens. You enter a room and instantly feel that something is different. You cannot explain why. Not yet. Your conscious mind has no answer. But your brain has already detected subtle changes, a facial expression, an unfamiliar silence, a shift in someone's tone of voice. Tiny details combine into a feeling before they become a thought. Perhaps intuition often begins there, not beyond the mind, but deep within its extraordinary ability to recognize patterns. Chapter 2. The language. No one taught you, approximately 2 minutes. Before children understand words, they already understand faces, a smile, a pause, the direction of someone's eyes, the rhythm of a voice, long before language becomes fluent. The brain is learning another language, the language of patterns. Throughout life, this silent learning continues. Without effort, you begin recognizing familiar environments, predicting people's reactions, sensing when something feels out of place, not because someone taught you every rule, but because your brain has spent years quietly collecting experience. Every conversation, every expression, every success, every disappointment adds another piece to an internal map. Most of the time, you never realize that map exists, until one day, it whispers before your thoughts do. Chapter 3. The first impression happens before you think, approximately 2 minutes. Imagine walking into a room where you've never been before. No one speaks, nothing unusual happens, yet almost instantly, you feel something. Maybe the atmosphere seems warm and welcoming. Maybe it feels tense, or perhaps you can't explain it at all. The feeling simply appears. Only later does your mind begin searching for reasons. Maybe it was the lighting. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way someone looked at me. But here's what makes this fascinating. Your brain had already begun processing countless details before your conscious thoughts arrived. Tiny facial expressions, body posture, distance between people, tone of movement, even subtle changes in breathing or eye contact. None of these signals alone tell the whole story. Together, they form patterns, and the human brain is remarkably good at recognizing patterns. This ability helped our ancestors survive. Long before written language, long before cities, recognizing danger or safety in just a few seconds could mean the difference between life and death. That ancient ability still lives inside us. Only now, instead of reading forests, we read people. Chapter 4. The patterns you never realize you learned, approximately 2 minutes. Think about how easily you recognize the voice of someone you love. Not because you consciously analyze every sound, but because your brain has heard thousands of subtle variations over time. Without effort, it builds a pattern. The same happens with music, with language, with faces, with places, with emotions. The human brain is often described as one of nature's greatest pattern detection systems. Every experience becomes another piece of information. Every conversation, every success, every disappointment, every unexpected surprise quietly updates an internal model of the world. Most of the time, you never notice this learning happening until one day something feels strangely familiar or strangely wrong. Have you ever met someone who reminded you of another person without looking alike? Perhaps it was the rhythm of their speech, their posture, the way they smiled. Your conscious mind couldn't identify the connection, but your brain already had. It had seen the pattern before. This doesn't make intuition infallible. Patterns can help us, but they can also mislead us. Sometimes similarities are meaningful. Sometimes they are coincidences. The challenge is learning the difference. And that brings us to one of the greatest strengths and one of the greatest weaknesses of the human mind. Chapter 5. When the mind fills in the missing pieces, approximately 2 minutes. Imagine reading a sentence with several missing letters. Surprisingly, you can often understand it without much difficulty. Your brain doesn't wait for perfect information. It completes the pattern. This ability makes reading faster, recognizing faces easier, understanding speech more efficient. Without it, everyday life would feel painfully slow. But there is another side to this remarkable skill. Sometimes, the brain fills in gaps incorrectly. We assume someone's intentions. We misinterpret a situation. We become certain about something that later turns out to be incomplete. This isn't because the brain is poorly designed. It's because evolution favored speed over perfection. In many situations, a quick estimate was more valuable than perfect accuracy. Today, that same system still shapes our daily lives. We make first impressions. We predict conversations. We anticipate outcomes, often before realizing we're doing it. The important question isn't whether the brain predicts. It always will. The real question is this: when should we trust those predictions? And when should we slow down long enough to question them? Chapter 6. When intuition gets it right, approximately 2 minutes. Have you ever met someone and within seconds felt an unexpected sense of trust? Or perhaps an unexplained feeling that something wasn't quite right? Later, something happened that seemed to confirm your first impression. Moments like these often lead people to believe intuition is mysterious, but psychology offers a fascinating perspective. Your brain is constantly comparing the present with thousands of previous experiences. Not one, not 10, thousands. Every conversation you've ever had, every face you've ever recognized, every disappointment, every success, every subtle emotional signal you've experienced throughout your life. Most of this information never reaches conscious awareness, yet it remains available to the brain. When a familiar pattern appears, your nervous system can react before your conscious mind understands why. This is one reason experienced firefighters sometimes leave a building moments before it collapses, or why seasoned doctors occasionally recognize that something is wrong before laboratory results arrive. Their intuition is not based on magic. It is built upon years of observation, repetition, and experience. The brain has quietly learned patterns that conscious reasoning would take far longer to identify. In these situations, intuition becomes compressed experience, knowledge moving faster than words. But there is another side to this story, because the same brain that recognizes meaningful patterns can also see patterns that are not really there. And that is where caution becomes just as important as confidence. Chapter 7. The patterns that don't exist. Approximately 2 minutes. Human beings are natural pattern seekers. Sometimes, too natural. Imagine looking at the clouds. Within seconds, you begin seeing animals, faces, mountains, entire landscapes. The clouds never intended to create those images. Your brain created them. This tendency has a name. Psychologists call it pattern perception. It is one of the reasons creativity exists. It helps artists imagine, Scientists develop new theories, engineers solve complex problems, but it also has a weakness. Sometimes, the brain connects unrelated events. A coincidence begins to feel meaningful. A random sequence appears intentional. An isolated experience becomes a universal rule. Our minds dislike uncertainty. Whenever information is incomplete, the brain naturally tries to complete the picture. Most of the time, that ability serves us remarkably well. Occasionally, it leads us toward conclusions that require more evidence than we currently possess. This is why critical thinking is so valuable, not because intuition is unreliable, but because intuition and careful reasoning complement one another. One notices possibilities, the other tests them. Together, they allow us to explore the world with both curiosity and discipline. Perhaps wisdom is not choosing one over the other. Perhaps wisdom is knowing when each is most useful. Chapter 8. The Art of Paying Attention, approximately 2 minutes. Think about the last meaningful conversation you had. Now ask yourself, how much of that conversation do you actually remember? The words, the pauses, the expressions, the emotions, or simply the conclusion? Attention is one of the rarest resources the human mind possesses, not because we cannot pay attention, but because countless things compete for it every moment. Notifications, memories, plans, concerns, expectations. The modern world constantly asks for your attention, yet very little invites your observation. Observation is different. Attention notices. Observation understands. Attention is seeing someone smile. Observation wonders why the smile appeared at that exact moment. Attention hears words. Observation notices silence. Attention collects information. Observation discovers meaning. Many of history's greatest discoveries began with someone observing something that everyone else had already seen. The falling apple, the stars, the movement of the planets, the structure of living cells. The difference was never simply intelligence, it was sustained curiosity, the willingness to remain with a question longer than everyone else. And perhaps that is a skill we can all develop, not by learning to think faster, but by learning to notice more carefully. Chapter 9. The moment you begin to see differently, approximately 2 minutes. Imagine walking the same street you've traveled 100 times before. The buildings haven't changed, the trees are in the same place, the people continue moving in every direction. Yet today, you notice something you had never seen before. Not because it suddenly appeared, but because your attention changed. This simple experience reveals one of the most remarkable truths about the human mind. The world is always offering more information than we can consciously perceive. Every moment, our brains decide what deserves attention, what should be remembered, what can safely be ignored. Without this filtering system, daily life would become overwhelming, but every filter has consequences. What we repeatedly notice becomes familiar. What we repeatedly ignore slowly disappears from conscious awareness. Over time, attention shapes experience. Experience shapes expectation. Expectation shapes future perception. A quiet cycle begins, and most of the time, we never realize it is happening. This is why learning is so powerful. Every meaningful insight changes the lens through which we observe reality, not because reality itself has changed, but because we have. Chapter 10. The Quiet Power of a Curious Mind, approximately 2.3 minutes. At the beginning of this journey, we asked a simple question. Why does your mind notice certain things before you do? The answer turned out to be far more complex than it first appeared. Your brain is constantly working behind the scenes, recognizing patterns, filtering information, comparing the present with the past, predicting what is likely to happen next. Sometimes these processes guide us remarkably well. Sometimes they remind us of the importance of slowing down and examining our assumptions. The true strength of the human mind is not that it never makes mistakes. Its strength lies in its ability to learn, to revise, to adapt, to become more accurate through experience. Perhaps wisdom is not the absence of uncertainty. Perhaps wisdom is becoming comfortable enough with uncertainty that we continue asking better questions instead of settling for easy answers. Every scientist, every philosopher, every explorer, every artist began in exactly the same place, with curiosity, not certainty, curiosity. And maybe that is the quiet force that has moved humanity forward for thousands of years. Not the belief that we already understand everything, but the willingness to admit that there is always more to discover. The next time your intuition speaks, listen. The next time your assumptions feel unquestionable, examine them. The next time something catches your attention, pause for a moment. Ask yourself why. Because the most important discoveries are not always hidden in distant galaxies, ancient ruins, or unexplored oceans. Sometimes, they begin inside the ordinary moments of everyday life, inside a conversation, a memory, a question, or a single observation that changes the way you see everything that follows. The mind is extraordinary, not because it gives us perfect answers, but because it never stops searching, and perhaps neither should we. Thank you for joining us on this exploration. If you enjoy documentaries that bring together psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, and the science of human behavior, subscribe to Senses. Every episode is an invitation to look more carefully at the world and at the remarkable mind that allows us to experience it. Until next time, stay curious. Keep observing. And remember, sometimes the greatest discoveries are not waiting somewhere else. They are waiting in the things we have been looking at all along, without truly seeing them. The most influential thinkers were not always those who had the most answers. Often, they were the ones brave enough to challenge assumptions that everyone else accepted. This is not a call to reject established knowledge. Quite the opposite. Science advances by testing ideas against evidence, revising conclusions when stronger evidence appears, and building on what has already been learned. History follows a similar path. Our picture of the past becomes clearer as new discoveries are carefully examined. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson history offers us. Certainty can feel comfortable. Curiosity moves us forward. And maybe, the future belongs to those who remain willing to learn. So far, we have explored how knowledge can be lost, rediscovered, and refined over time. But there is another question hiding beneath the surface. If every generation inherits an incomplete picture of reality, how do our beliefs influence what we choose to preserve, question, or ignore? To answer that, we need to leave the world of ancient civilizations for a moment and look inward, because every society tells stories, but every individual does the same. And sometimes, the stories we inherit shape the way we see the world long before we realize they are there. Long before we ask our first question, the world has already begun answering for us. Before we choose what to believe, we inherit a language, a culture, a family history, a way of interpreting success, failure, time, even happiness. These invisible frameworks become so familiar that we rarely notice them. Imagine two children growing up on opposite sides of the planet. Different traditions, different customs, different ideas about what makes a meaningful life. As adults, they may look at the same event and reach completely different conclusions, not because one is more intelligent than the other, but because each mind learned to organize reality through a different set of stories. Psychologists sometimes describe these internal frameworks as mental models. They help us navigate an incredibly complex world. Without them, every decision would require starting from zero. But every model has limitations. It highlights certain details and quietly pushes others into the background. History works in much the same way. Every generation inherits a collection of stories about the past. Some are confirmed by evidence. Some are revised as new discoveries emerge. Others are replaced entirely. The remarkable part is not that change happens. The remarkable part is that we are capable of changing our minds at all. That ability, To update our understanding in light of new evidence may be one of humanity's greatest strengths, and perhaps it is also one of the greatest challenges, because changing our minds often feels like losing certainty, when in reality, it may simply mean getting closer to the truth. If history teaches us anything, it is that curiosity has always been more powerful than certainty. Every major breakthrough began with someone asking a question that others considered unnecessary. Why do the planets move the way they do? What causes disease? How does memory work? What is consciousness? Many of these questions once seemed impossible to answer. Some still are. Yet humanity continued searching, not because every answer was guaranteed, but because the search itself expanded our understanding. Curiosity is different from skepticism for its own sake. Curiosity does not reject evidence. It seeks it. It welcomes new information, even when that information challenges long-held beliefs. This mindset transformed astronomy, medicine, physics, psychology, and continues shaping neuroscience today. The history of knowledge is not the story of people who were always right. It is the story of people willing to revise what they thought they knew. Perhaps this is why genuine learning often feels uncomfortable. Every new idea asks us to compare it with the old ones. Sometimes the old ideas remain stronger. Sometimes they don't. And that process, though slow, is how understanding grows. The greatest discoveries rarely arrive as complete answers. More often, they begin as better questions. We have traveled through history, explored how knowledge evolves, and reflected on the stories that shape our understanding of the world. But there is one final question. If every generation leaves behind a map for the next, what kind of map are we creating today? Will future generations look back at us the way we look back at those who came before? Will they discover ideas we overlooked, or admire the questions we dared to ask? Perhaps the greatest legacy of human civilization is not any single invention or discovery. Perhaps it is something far simpler, the willingness to keep searching. In the final chapters, we'll bring these ideas together and explore why the pursuit of understanding may be one of the defining characteristics of what it means to be human. When we think about discovery, our minds often travel outward, across oceans, into space, toward distant civilizations, hidden ruins, unknown galaxies. History celebrates explorers who crossed continents, scientists who transformed our understanding of nature, inventors who changed the course of civilization. And rightly so. These achievements reshaped the world. But there is another kind of exploration, one that receives far less attention. The exploration of the human mind itself. For thousands of years, people have tried to understand what it means to think, to remember, to imagine, to dream, to become conscious of being conscious. Unlike a mountain, the mind cannot be mapped with a compass. Unlike a city, it cannot be fully explored by walking through it. Every discovery reveals another mystery. Every answer uncovers another question. Perhaps that is why the study of the human mind remains one of the greatest scientific and philosophical adventures of our time. Because the instrument we use to understand reality is itself one of reality's greatest mysteries. There is an interesting pattern throughout history. Every major breakthrough solved one mystery, only to reveal several new ones. When humanity discovered that Earth orbits the Sun, new questions emerged about the universe. When we learned that microscopic organisms cause many diseases, entire fields of medicine were born. When neuroscience began revealing how billions of neurons communicate, a deeper mystery appeared. How do electrical signals become subjective experience? How does physical activity inside the brain become the feeling of love, the memory of childhood, or the beauty of music? Science has made extraordinary progress, yet consciousness remains one of its greatest open questions. Researchers continue investigating how brain activity relates to conscious experience. Philosophers continue debating what consciousness actually is. Different perspectives coexist, And perhaps that is exactly what makes this field so fascinating. Not because uncertainty is a weakness, but because unanswered questions invite careful exploration. Every generation inherits mysteries and leaves new mysteries behind. Imagine someone living 200 years from now, looking back at our time. They may admire discoveries that seem ordinary to us today. They may also wonder, why did people believe certain things so confidently? What questions were they afraid to ask? Which assumptions delayed new discoveries? History suggests this has happened before, not because previous generations lacked intelligence, but because every era is limited by the knowledge available to it. Perhaps the same is true for us. The greatest breakthroughs of tomorrow may begin with questions that seem small today. Questions about the brain, about learning, about consciousness, about human cooperation, about the universe itself. Curiosity is not simply a personality trait. It is one of the engines of civilization. Every book, every telescope, every laboratory, every library, every spacecraft, every conversation like this one exists because someone decided that not knowing was a reason to keep searching. At the beginning of this journey, we asked a simple question. What if history remembered only half the story? Perhaps now, the question feels different. History is not simply a record of what happened. It is the story of humanity's growing understanding of itself. Each generation inherits knowledge, tests it, questions it, expands it, then passes it forward. Sometimes we discover forgotten manuscripts. Sometimes we uncover ancient cities. Sometimes we invent entirely new ways of observing the universe. And sometimes, the greatest discovery is realizing that certainty has limits. Knowledge is not a destination. It is a process. The history of civilization is not the history of perfect answers. It is the history of better questions. Perhaps that is what truly connects us to every generation that came before us. The desire to understand, to explore, to learn, to leave the world slightly more understood than we found it. The story of humanity has never belonged to kings alone, or philosophers, or scientists. It belongs to every person who has ever looked at the world and wondered, could there be more to discover? Because there always has been, and there always will be. The next great discovery may not begin in a laboratory or inside an ancient ruin. It may begin with something much quieter, a single question, one that inspires someone to keep searching when everyone else believes the search is over. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you enjoy exploring the intersection of history, science, psychology, and the enduring questions that shape human understanding, subscribe to Senses. Every episode is an invitation to look beyond what is familiar and to discover how curiosity continues to transform the way we see ourselves and the world. Until next time, keep asking, keep learning, because the story is still being written.